Welcome to the Maison Law Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Maison Law Podcast with Attorney Martin Gasparian, founder of Maison Law. After years representing large corporations, Martin understands the factors insurance companies and defense teams evaluate when determining the value of an injury claim. I'm SeanOConnor, and today, Martin's going to break down how much a personal injury case may actually be worth in California. Hello, Martin.
Good afternoon, Sean.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
Let's talk about how you determine what a personal injury case may be worth. What's driving that determination?
Certainly, Sean. Well, so the main value drivers typically in a personal injury claim are your medical bills, your future treatment, your rehab costs, the wages that you've lost, and your reduced future earning capacity, pain and suffering, emotional distress, and loss of enjoyment of life, the severity and permanence of the injury, including whether recovery is expected or the harm is long-term, how clearly the other side was at fault, and how strong the evidence is. Of course, available insurance limits and collectability is also a driving factor.
Martin, I first want to get into how you even go about determining what a personal injury case may be worth. What drives that?
Certainly, Sean. So the main driving factors are obviously your medical bills, what sort of future treatment you would need, and the costs associated with that. Additionally, driving factors include what your past lost wages are, what sort of reduced future earning capacity you have. Of course, the pain and suffering, emotional distress, and the loss of enjoyment of life also drive. Other factors that also drive is how clearly the other party was at fault, how strong the evidence is, and what sort of insurance limits there are for collectability purposes.
Got it. Well, how do you get to the what determines dollar values? I don't know if I'm phrasing that right, but I think you know what I mean.
I do, Sean. So a claim with high medical costs, clear liability, and lasting impairment is generally worth more than a claim with minor treatment, disputed fault, and a full recovery. In practice, the value is not set by a fixed formula. It is negotiated based on the overall strength of the case.
How do insurance companies actually evaluate the severity of an injury when deciding what a claim may be worth?
Well, so adjusters typically combine the medical picture with internal valuation methods that each insurance company has, what the reserve amounts are, and historical settlement data from similar claims. In practice, the same injury can be valued very differently depending on liability, documentation, how clearly the records show real-world impact.
Martin, let me ask you a question. Why, this may be obvious to some people, why does documentation matter so much?
Of course, Sean. So the reason why documentation matters so much is the more the records show a clear timeline from accident to treatment to recovery, the easier it is for the insurer to treat the injury as serious. Good pictures, diagnostic testing, provider notes, and work loss records all help support a higher valuation.
Got it. So we've got medical bills. If you go beyond medical bills, what types of losses and damages can actually increase the value of a case in your experience?
The first big driver is obviously your lost wages, the time you had to miss from work, including overtime, bonuses, commissions, and any benefits are recoverable. Your reduced earning capacity as well. If the injury affects the client's ability to work long-term, that can significantly increase case value. Last, but certainly not least, is the pain and suffering the client has experienced. Physical pain, chronic discomfort, and ongoing limitations often make up a huge part of the claim. Emotional distress, anxiety, depression, PTSD, fear, and similar harms can add value.
There's you've used this phrase, loss of enjoyment of life. I understand on the surface what that means, but is that a term of art in these kinds of cases, loss of enjoyment of life? What is that? How do you quantify that?
It is, Sean. So that goes into what the pain and suffering aspect of damages is. If the injury keeps someone from hobbies, from family activities, from exercise, or normal daily life, that loss matters. So you are compensated for that loss, Sean.
Got it. Got it. And what about, I mean, it's awful to think about, but, if you're disfigurement, scar, like, okay, glass from the windshield scars me. How does that get handled?
Certainly, disfigurement or scarring is also part of pain and suffering. Visible or permanent changes to your appearances increase your pain and suffering damages. So for example, also the location of the scar, uh, depending on whether it's visible or invisible, may affect the dollar amount on the damages as well.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So if I have to live with a, scar on my face, or if I was a highly paid fashion model and now I have a scar on my face, that's gonna cost somebody something for my loss of future work, I'm guessing.
That is absolutely correct, Sean.
I hear people compare their case to a settlement, say they heard about online, or a neighbor down the street. Why can two seemingly similar accidents produce very different outcomes?
So two people with the same type of accident may produce different outcomes because one may have a soft tissue strain from that accident, while the other ends up having some sort of surgical intervention, a permanent impairment. Treatment and recovery for each individual is always different, and the body responds differently. The amount of care, duration of symptoms, any sort of gaps in treatments, and whether the person has reached maximum medical improvement all affect the value.
Got it.
Liability as well
Oh,
may not be equal. There may be shared fault, disputed causation, or weak witness support that can reduce or delay recovery.
Martin, what about insurance coverage? Because I know, my insurance coverage is probably different than your insurance coverage. How does that come into play?
Yeah, so insurance coverage differs. Policy limits can cap a settlement even when the injury is serious. Most drivers in the state of California have the state minimum, which has changed now. It traditionally was at $15,000 for each claimant. Now it's at $30,000 for each claimant. But yeah, depending on what the limits are for the outfall party, your recovery may differ as well.
Hmm. And so, I mean, you were talking earlier about the, economic loss. I was sort of half kiddingly talking about being a fashion model and, being disfigured. But, you and I could have the exact same accident, let's say, same exact injuries. But like if you were a high paid attorney and I was a relatively low wage restaurant worker, our payment would our payments be different because of your future earning potential versus mine? Did they do that math?
That is correct, Sean. So the economic losses would tremendously differ in that situation. The white collar professionals' earned income and future earning loss would be substantially greater than the plaintiff who would be involved in blue collar type labor. So yes, the recovery in that scenario, even though the injuries are the same, would be vastly different.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic there. I'm going to move on. I want to ask you about insurance coverage and how the amount of available insurance coverage might affect what someone actually recovers.
There are scenarios where you may come across where your injuries are far more serious than what the available limits are from the outfall party's driver, and that's the reason why in those types of scenarios we constantly recommend our clients to have uninsured motorist coverage greater than the state minimum limit, so that they're able to get additional compensation from their own insurance as well.
Why why is it I don't know, say impossible, but it seems like it's impossible to know what a case is worth in the first few weeks after an accident. And I know, people are in a hurry to clear this stuff up. Why is it take a relatively, more than a few weeks to figure out what something's worth.
Sure, Sean. It's often impossible to know a case value in the first few weeks because the most important variables are still unknown. At that stage, you usually don't know yet the full diagnosis, whether symptoms will resolve or worsen.
I mean, in your experience, so what would you do? Would you wait? Like if I were your client and I had an injury from an accident, would you recommend we wait a period of time to see kind of what develops? How do you manage that?
An example of a case where the initial value of the claim looked very different once all the facts and treatments and long-term effects became clear, for example, Sean, is a crash where the person initially walks away thinking that all they have is a soft tissue injuries and a soft tissue claim. But later it turns out that their injuries are more serious and there's a disc injury involved and they're going to need more invasive treatment.
Martin, can you share an example of a case where the initial value of a claim looked very different once all the facts and treatment and long-term effects became clear?
Yes, of course, Sean. A common example is a crash that initially looks like a routine soft tissue claim, but later turns out much higher value case once the medical picture develops. For example, a driver may walk away from a rear-end collision with only neck pain and a small ER bill, so early on, the claim looks modest. Then the treatment reveals a disc injury, months of physical therapy, injections, time missed from work, and persistent symptoms that affect daily activities or limit daily activities. By that time, the person reaches maximum medical improvement. The claim may include future care, lost earning capacity, and significant pain and suffering, making it far more than anyone would have guessed in the first few weeks. That kind of change is why early numbers are often unreliable. The original evaluation usually missed the late symptoms, the full recourse of treatment, and whether the injury is permanent and how much the injury will affect work and life long term.
Wow. Got it. So, Martin, with just a couple of minutes we have left here, I want to throw this, we've got, obviously someone, people listening here. And I'm like, if someone out there has been injured and is trying to understand what their case may be worth, what would you want them to know before accepting an insurance company's valuation of their claim?
Yes, Sean. Before accepting an insurer's number, I would want them to know that the first offer is often based on incomplete information and may not include the full picture of future treatment, future wage loss, or non-economic harm like pain, scarring, emotional distress, and loss of enjoyment of life. I also want them to understand that if they settle too early, they usually give up the chance to recover more later, even if the injury turns out to be worse than expected.
So like if you accept that offer, you're done.
Correct. You only got one shot at this. So once you put your pen to the paper and sign the release, there is no way of reopening the claim.
Wow. Well, that's good to know. Martin, thank you very much. We're up against time here, but pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to future conversation.
Likewise, Sean.
That's it for today's episode of the Maison Law Podcast. If you want to learn more about your rights after an accident and how Martin and the team at Maison Law can help you, visit their website, maisonlaw.com. Thanks for listening, and as always, don't forget to leave a review, maybe a thumbs up, subscribe to the show, maybe even share a link with someone in your world who might benefit from this kind of information. I'm SeanOConnor. Have a great day.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.